The scandal around Joe Biden's age is not going away, but it's also about something much bigger, and that could get worse in the years ahead. Joe Biden's presidency is over, but the debate over his legacy, and especially the legacy of his health and well-being, has only just begun. In the first half of 2025, a bunch of books about the 2024 election have been published. That's not unusual. That happens every presidential election nowadays. The one thing reporters love more than election season is getting to do a book tour afterwards. What makes these books different, though, is just how much they talk about a guy who wasn't actually on the ballot. All of them also include in-depth reporting about Biden, his White House, his aborted campaign, and give a look behind the scenes into how the oldest president in history actually worked and thought and acted when the cameras weren't on. And what they tell us is pretty big, and the lessons are much bigger than Biden. But first, let's talk about the books themselves, because having read all of them, let me tell you, it's not pretty. There are three main books I'm talking about, and each one of them has their own claims and revelations. The first is called Fight by Amy Parnes and Jonathan Allen. It goes into a lot of detail about behind-the-scenes drama among Democrats, including tension between Biden and Barack Obama, and between Biden and Kamala Harris. It reports that part of how Biden advisors got hesitant Democrats on board with his reelection bid was by pointing to Harris and saying that she would do way worse than Biden. It also claims that White House advisors, quote, strategized around the possibility that Biden might die in office, including researching federal judges who might swear Harris in as president. And it says, like some others do, that one person, more than any other, was the driving force behind Biden running for re-election. His wife, Jill Biden, who apparently loved being First Lady. The second book is called Uncharted by Chris Whipple. This book is slightly different. Whipple writes that Biden was in command of most of his responsibilities, but was also still declining. And he argues that Biden's staff weren't so much lying to other people as much as they were lying to themselves. He writes that Biden's advisors were in a, quote, fog of delusion and denial, and, quote, minimized his contact with almost everyone outside of a small bubble. It also has a fascinating look at Biden's prep for his debate with Donald Trump. Ron Klain, who was Biden's first chief of staff and came back to help with his prep, goes on the record to say that Biden was totally out of it. He, quote, didn't know what Trump had been saying and couldn't grasp what the back and forth was. And after a couple minutes of one prep session, Biden apparently wandered out of the room, collapsed into a chair by the pool, and fell asleep. In the middle of prep. In the middle of the day. By the way, a month later, Klain publicly defended Biden staying in the race. The last one is called Original Sin by Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper. This one has gotten the most attention because it's exclusively about Biden and his age. And it includes a ton of details. Some big ones. Biden's staff apparently considered the possibility of him being in a wheelchair during his second term. And Biden himself would forget the names of lawmakers and even close aides. The Biden family allegedly removed the traditional staff from around the residence, where the family sleeps and hangs out, so that they could shield the president even more. And 4 Biden cabinet secretaries, 4, told the authors that behind the scenes, Biden was hardcore declining in 2022 and 2023, that they couldn't reach him or were shut off from him, or that cabinet meetings were a charade. It's a wild book full of a lot of that stuff. Now, the disclaimers. 1. Biden and his staff have denied a lot of these stories, calling them exaggerations or false or whatever. 2. A bunch of these books rely on anonymous sourcing, which a lot of people, especially Trump and his defenders, have criticized in recent years. So take it all with a grain of salt. But also be aware that journalists outright fabricating quotes is an enormous deal that rarely happens. 3. There are real questions here about how much journalists knew about this stuff years ago, or should have known about it and didn't go after it aggressively enough. And there are real questions about degrees here. Looking and sounding bad is different from actual cognitive decline. Stephen Hawking couldn't speak on his own. That doesn't mean he was stupid or incapable. But at this point, enough time has passed and enough things have become clear that there's really no point in denying the very clear picture that Joe Biden precipitously declined during his presidency. I mean, just look at him speaking in 2016.
You know, if Bernie Sanders never said he was a democratic socialist, based on what he's saying, people wouldn't be calling him a democratic socialist. That's how he characterizes himself in sort of European terms.
And 2020.
I would be putting what I did as vice president. I met with Xi Jinping more than anyone else. I would be putting pressure on China to put pressure on Korea to cease and desist from their nuclear power.
And early 2024.
By the way, used to make beer brewed here. It is used to make the brew beer in this refinery. Oh, Earth Rider, thanks for the Great Lakes.
Whatever your politics, it's just silly to pretend otherwise. And it was silly before the debate too. I was covering and talking about this issue before that debate, and a ton of Democrats online would get really mad at me, including emails and DMs to my job and saying I should be fired. But all the while, those Biden defenders were a minority of a minority. As early as 2022, a majority of Democrats didn't want Biden to run again. In late 2023, 4 polls in 1 month found 75% of the country saying he was too old to serve a second term. So the bottom line is, anyone who was really paying attention wasn't surprised by what we learned from that fateful debate, or most stuff we've learned from these books. The only people who've really had their eyes opened are Democratic and media elites. Everyone else has been here. Now, people will be talking, debating, and reporting about Biden's age for a long time, and they should. You can cover Trump and the seriousness and the bigness of what he's doing during his second presidency, and also cover the defining issue of his predecessor's term, especially the issue that helped put Trump in a position to have a second presidency. No liberal thought that we should stop talking about January 6th or Trump's COVID handling the second he left office. Bill Clinton didn't become immune from us talking about his sexual misconduct the second George Bush became president. And George Bush didn't become immune from criticism over the Iraq War the second Obama became president. Presidents' stories and legacies are always shaped in the years after they leave office. And again, exactitude matters here. There's a lot of space between Joe Biden was an obviously old man whose faculties declined, and he was a vegetable who couldn't speak. These books don't answer all of those questions. Maybe others will. We deserve to know the full story. But this also isn't just about Biden. In fact, even if you take some of the most negative interpretations of Biden and his staff, covering up presidents' health issues isn't new at all. Let's look at history. Grover Cleveland. In 1893, at the beginning of his second term, he covered up his cancer diagnosis and a tumor removal. His staff lied about where he was going and why, so that he could get onto a moving boat and have his tumor secretly removed. It worked. And fun fact, surgeons now are actually super impressed with how well the doctors did. Woodrow Wilson. In 1919, he had a severe stroke that incapacitated him for months. The White House concealed it and lied about it, leading to the country largely being run by First Lady Edith Wilson. So much so that some people refer to her as the first woman president. FDR. He was already using a wheelchair when he first ran for president in 1932, but he and his campaign kept it as secret as possible. He developed a ton of health issues over the course of his presidency, most of which were also kept secret. And in 1944, he was diagnosed with a bunch of issues that were basically a death sentence, including congenital heart failure. But that year, he ran for re-election to a 4th term anyway, which he died months into. Dwight Eisenhower. He had a bunch of health episodes throughout his presidency, including a heart attack in 1955 that his doctor helped downplay and cover up, in part so that he could run for re-election in 1956. JFK. He had a ton of health issues throughout his life, including Addison's disease, which he lied about not having when he first ran for president in 1960. During his presidency, he was on enough medications to kill a horse, most of them undisclosed, including during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Ronald Reagan. He was treated for cancer multiple times during his presidency and publicly announced that he had Alzheimer's 5 years after leaving office. Many analysts and 2 of his children say that he first exhibited signs of Alzheimer's, including doctors finding plaque on his brain, while he was still in office. And for that matter, look at Trump. When he got COVID in 2020, he and his staff gave inaccurate information about how bad it was, which we know in part because his own chief of staff slipped up and revealed the truth to reporters. Trump's own personal doctor publicly said that Trump dictated a medical letter that declared he would be, quote, the healthiest individual ever elected to the presidency. You don't need to be a pink pussy hat wearing Trump hater to acknowledge that's crazy and also deceptive. And believe me, there are other examples. So issues of the president's age and acuity and honesty did not begin with Biden. In fact, they're basically as old as the country itself. So saying Biden's age is the worst scandal in history is silly and ahistorical. But just because it's happened before doesn't mean it's not a big deal. It's happened before that presidents have been overt white supremacists or sexual assaulters or ordered people of one ethnicity into camps. That doesn't mean it wouldn't be a huge deal for presidents to do or be those things now, right? And this all becomes really relevant given another fact. The whole issue around Biden's age is not hugely unique. Age is increasingly a ticking time bomb in American politics. Think about this. In the 2000s, 19 members of Congress died in office. In the 2010s, 12 did. Halfway through the 2020s, 14 have already died in office, already exceeding the entire total last decade. Now sure, some of this is just chance and bad luck, which you can never predict. But there are some reasons for this that we can predict, and they are not going away. For starters, there's medical advancements. In the 2000s, only one of those members who died in office were in their 80s. This decade, 5 have been in their 80s. People who used to die in their 60s or 70s just live longer now, especially people with access to good medical care, like members of Congress, which lets them serve longer. But that also creates more situations where people are alive, but also super physically or mentally limited. And that's only going to get more relevant as medicine and technology continually improve. Second, there's the rise of partisanship. No, this is not some ode to bipartisanship and moderation. It's just a fact about how Congress works now. We've talked a lot on this channel about how partisanship and party identity has changed politics. Go check it out. But look at this chart from the Cook Political Report. In 1999, a plurality of House seats, 164, were truly competitive. By 2023, that number was cut in half. That change means parties can just get away with running and keeping in office more and more people who plainly cannot do their jobs, and see less political backlash because those districts and states are so loyal to one party. It's not a coincidence that many of the members we know have had really serious health issues, from Democrat Dianne Feinstein to Republican Kay Granger, represented deep blue and deep red areas. Both Biden and Trump, who traded off being the oldest presidents in history, were protected from backlash over the lies and deception around their health because of partisanship and the fear of giving the other side a win. That polarization is not going away. So, how do you fix it? One answer a lot of people give is term limits. But there are real limitations to that idea when it comes to age. For example, a common suggestion is to limit serving in each House of Congress to 18 years, 3 Senate terms and 9 House terms. But that would mean people like Democrat Maxwell Frost, who was elected at 25, and Republican Brandon Gill, who was elected at 30, would be forced to retire in their 40s, while people like Democrat George Latimer, who was elected at 70, and Republican James Baird, who was elected at 73, could serve until they were 88 and 91. Senators like Tim Sheehy and John Ossoff, who were elected in their 30s, would be forced to retire in their 50s, while senators like Jim Justice and Peter Welch, who were elected in their late 70s, could serve until their 90s. I mean, for that matter, look at the presidency. It already has term limits, and that didn't stop Biden and Trump, the 2 oldest presidents ever, from running to serve into their 80s. And a legal age cap, like the minimums we already have, would require a constitutional amendment. And that's not even taking into account how differently age looks on different people. Bernie Sanders is older than both Biden and Trump. You can think whatever you want about him, but it's just a fact that we have never seen him speak incoherently in public the way both of them have. Now, Congress could pass a law that requires the president, vice president, and top congressional leaders to undergo independent medical evaluation and mandatory disclosures. That would be a good step, but it still wouldn't force advisors to be honest, or parties to listen to voters, or politicians to put the country ahead of their ego. So there's no silver bullet solution. But there is real reason, whatever party you cheer for, to think that this could theoretically get much worse in the years ahead. And wherever you fall, Republican, Democrat, moderate, libertarian, leftist, whatever, you should care about this. And if we don't want something like the 2024 election crisis to happen again, we can't continue to be pushed into reflexive partisan corners. We owe that to each other and ourselves. What do you think the legacy of Biden's age is? How bad do you think it actually got? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, seeing through the daily grind, seeing the big picture on politics, hit that subscribe button and hit the bell so you know every time we post a video.